All right, well, there are really two things that I want to talk about today as we move into week 3 of our series here, Love and Discipline. I want us to talk about why parenting is so hard. Okay, everybody agree? Parenting's hard? Yeah. We do have maybe a few people pregnant with their first child in the room. I'm just going to break it to you. Like, parenting's hard, okay? So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about a guide for how to approach parenting your kids, especially in the area of discipline. Now, first, I need to make sure that you know that I am not up here because I'm the perfect parent, okay? I have had the days where you pull in the garage and one kid storms off into the house crying, and the other kid says, "I'm going to find a new family," and starts up the hill. And I actually asked my son about that the other day, and I was like, "Do you remember that?" He goes, "Yeah, you posted about it on Facebook." It's like, darn right I did. Like, that was too good to pass up. But then I've had the days where I wanted to be the one who said, "I'm going to find a new family," and start walking up the hill. And so if you haven't gotten there yet, or if you have, that is just part of the rite of passage of being a mom. Like, it is normal, and I want you to hear that. And I want you to know that, and it's okay. Because remember, our first week, we set the foundation for why we should discipline our kids, that our goal is really to help prepare them and point them to a relationship with Jesus. So when we screw up, when we have those hard days, it's a chance for us to say to our kids and to remind ourselves how much we need Jesus. That our kids need more than what we can provide. They need somebody bigger than us, which is Jesus. And so we desperately want you to understand that discipline and love go together. And that discipline, not punishment, hear the differentiation between those two, but discipline is one of the greatest gifts that you can give your kids because it's actually one of the best ways that you can show them that you love them. And then last week, Carrie talked about pay me now or pay me later, and the fact that if you put in the work now, even though it's painful, like having to set Drew's broken arm, it's painful in the moment, but it is for their good, and it pays off in the long run. And you will hear me say this over and over. Paying now, in the stage you're in, it is hard. It is hard work. But paying and waiting to pay later, it always costs more. It is always harder in the long run. So this is really the last week of what I kind of call our first 3 foundational weeks of our study. And then after this week, we'll begin to really move into the how-tos and the practical nuts and bolts of discipline. But let me go back to why I think parenting is so tough. I don't know if you either read the book or might remember the movie Maze Runner. It's been a few years now. But it's one of those dystopian teen novels where these young guys are stuck in this outdoor wilderness called the Glade, okay? And the Glade is basically this wilderness, but it's surrounded by these cliffs, and they're trapped in this space. So these boys are trying to figure out how to escape from the Glade. And every morning, these huge stone doors in one of the cliffs slide open. And beyond those doors, they discover is a huge maze. So every day what happens is the stone doors open and they send out a runner, that's what they call them. They send a runner out to try to figure out the maze and escape the Glade. But here's the thing, behind those rock cliffs and beyond those doors, at night are all sorts of creatures and dangers. And so they have this timing down. If they know when the doors are going to open, they run out in the Glade, they run around all day, but they come back before the doors close where they're safe. But here's the catch. Every night after they come back into the Glade and they're safe, while they're asleep, the maze changes. So I'm watching this movie, and it dawns on me, oh my gosh, this is parenting. Because just about the time you think you're figuring things out, your toddler decides to drop their nap. Or you're finally getting some sleep, but then they get their 2-year molars and now they're waking up at night again. Or your family's kind of finally getting into a rhythm, but then you have one that starts kindergarten. Or your husband changes jobs, or you decide to move, or something happens and the maze that you are running as a parent changes. You've got it all down with kid number 1, and then kid number 2 comes on the scene, and everything changes. And that is what makes parenting so unique and so difficult, is that it's constantly changing. But it's also incredibly wonderful because that challenge stretches us, it grows us, and ultimately it forces us to do what we're trying to help our kids do, which is turn our hearts back to Jesus, in dependence on him rather than ourselves. Lisa TerKeurst said this in one of her books, "When I was a young mom, I was desperate for a formula I could plug my family into that would yield great kids." Wouldn't that be nice? She said, "I spent the first 5 years of motherhood convinced I was messing my kids up beyond repair." Anybody feeling that? Yeah, a couple brave hands. She said, "I've finally learned there is no perfect parenting formula. We weren't made to follow formulas. We were made to follow Jesus." And I love that. So today I want us to look at 3 areas that combine to basically blow up all of the formulas. And these are the reasons that you don't come home from the hospital with a parenting manual, or that nobody's written a parenting manual that everybody's like, yes, this is the one, this is the way. It's because of these 3 things. First is that we all have different kids, right? Think about your kids versus your friends' kids versus even their siblings. They're different. Every child is different. And the bad news is none of them are just like you. Maybe that's good news to you. I don't know. But a key verse that we're looking at this week is Proverbs 22:6. And I'd like to read it from the Amplified Version. It's going to be in your lesson for your small group this morning. It says, "Train up a child in the way he should go." And here's the Amplified part of it. "And in keeping with his individual gift or bent. And when he's old, he will not depart from it." Because here's the thing. We have kids that are different ages. They're different personalities, they have different abilities, they have different talents and gifts and strengths and weaknesses. And Proverbs 22:6 tells us to take those things into account. And so if we're going to do that, then we have to know our child's individual bent. So how do we do that? Well, we talk to them. We observe them. We learn to ask them questions, even simple ones. One of the favorite things that my husband did with our kids is occasionally, and not on any, he didn't have any sort of schedule. It was just randomly he would remember to do it. He has a list just of all these questions. What's your favorite toy? What's your favorite color? What's your favorite food? Who's your favorite friend? What's your favorite movie? There was a stage where Charlie's answer to everything was Batman, but it's fun to go back and to look at those. But know your kids. Ask them questions. Who's the funniest kid in your class? What's your favorite thing about our home? What do you worry about? What makes you feel safe? Learn about their personality. Learn what makes them tick. Take notice of where they struggle. Notice the things that bring them joy. And then one of the best ways you can learn about them is to observe their reactions to things. When Charlie was young, he would get really frustrated when I would give him a long verbal to-do list. He just got overwhelmed and frustrated, and I would say, I need you to go pick up your shoes, get your backpack, and put your jacket on, and go get in the car. And it was too much. It overwhelmed him. And so once I began to pay attention to that and realize that, I began to give him a shorter list. Go find your shoes and come back to me. Now go get your backpack. Come back to me. Now go get your jacket. Okay, now go get in the car. I learned how to talk to him. I learned how to interact with him by paying attention to his reactions, and we got the job done without him getting so frustrated. which meant I didn't get so frustrated. And when we approach our kids in a way that takes into account their unique design, we are honoring them. We're honoring God by respecting the person that He's created and put into our family. And when we do that, we'll find that the environment of our home improves and our relationships with them improve as well. So not only do we have different kids, we also have different situations. We need to be aware of the external factors and circumstances surrounding our kids that help to drive their behavior. Sometimes your kid's tank is just empty. Physically, emotionally, mentally. When your kid gets tired and hungry, what happens? They absolutely lose their ever-loving minds, right? So sometimes we get in a situation that calls less for consequences and more for like a snack and a nap. Sometimes that's true for me as well. And sometimes your kid's tank is empty emotionally. Maybe your kid is going to school and they're having trouble with friends. Or maybe you have a 3-year-old who's struggling to adjust to the new baby in the house. Maybe there's something else going on, but again, this is where you have to be a student of your child. We've got to look behind the behavior for the driver. We don't really have time to get into this today, but if you aren't familiar with the 5 love languages, go home and just Google 5 love languages. Ways that you can fill your child's tank. And some of us get filled by certain things and not others. And so those things are physical touch, quality time, words of encouragement, gifts, and acts of service. I really encourage you to look at those, read about them, and start using them in your home. Figure out how your child tends to give love and how they need to receive love for you so that you can fill their tank according to their bent, like Proverbs 22:6 tells us. Now, hear me out. These situations that we're talking about are not excuses to just not discipline your child. But they are factors that we need to consider. Because if we're not doing that, then we're not honoring or discipling or even disciplining our child in the way that we're talking about discipline. We're just using behavior management. And so if things aren't complicated enough by having different kids and different situations, the third thing is we have different parents. We each have our own strengths and our own weaknesses, our own personalities and tendencies. So I have a question for you. I want you to think for a minute about a mom you know. Maybe she's in your group sitting in this room. Maybe it's just a friend that you have. A mom that you know that's doing a great job. Okay? You got somebody that's doing a great job. Now I want you to think about the way she does things. Does she do things exactly like you do things? No, probably not. But yet, you just said she was doing a great job. And I just think we need to be more aware of that. I think we need to remember that different doesn't mean wrong. Because we're all different parents, we're struggling through different situations, and we're raising different kids. And so the reason that she does things differently is just like the maze runner, she's running a different maze than you are. And so sometimes where another mom turns left and you turn right, it doesn't mean either of you did something wrong. It just means that you're running a different maze. And we need to have grace and compassion. We need to give each other freedom to be different. Now, a little side note here. Please don't take what I'm saying to the extreme of, well, whatever's good for you, whatever's true for you is how it is. There are rights and wrongs. There is a target that we need to be aiming at. But there are multiple ways to get there. So just be sure that you're aiming at the right target, and then we need to give each other freedom to get there in the way that God is leading. So with all these differences, what do we do? How do we approach parenting? And I'll tell you the best thing that you can do, the best thing that we can do when we are overwhelmed as moms. The Bible tells us back in the Old Testament, it says, we don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you. We need to look to God and His Word when we're overwhelmed because it reorients us, it refocuses us, and it gives us direction. Obviously, we've got to pay attention to these differences. But if that's all that we're looking at, if we're only looking at understanding our child, then we've missed the boat. Because no matter how much we understand our kids, we will have failed as moms if we've missed their hearts. So I want to finish today by going deeper and seeing that there are 3 heart conditions that we can evaluate in our kids. And we're going to look at this together on the screen. We're going to look at this verse, 1 Thessalonians 5:14. And it says, I urge you, we're just going to change a couple letters there. We're going to say, I urge you mothers, okay? I urge you mothers to admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, and be patient with them all. I love this verse because it's almost like a little flow chart. You know, if this, you go here. If this, you go over here. It tells you what to do, but instead of being focused on the outside, it's focused on our kids' hearts. So is my child weak? Are they discouraged? Are they being irresponsible or lazy? This verse helps me look past their behavior to their heart. And once I know where their heart is, then I know how I can step in. So we're going to walk through this verse, and I'd like for us to start at the end and work backwards because I think that's the natural flow of how our kids develop and how our parenting works as our kids grow and mature. So we're going to start at the end, and it says, be patient with them all. Blanket statement, no matter where your kid is, no matter what's going on with them, this is the place to start because it always applies. We have to be patient. Now, don't get confused because patience does not mean failure to take action. It means that we endure with our kids, that we continue to teach them, but we give them a chance to figure things out. We're committed to the long term of our kids. I was telling a friend yesterday, I said, I've decided that parenting is like baking bread. Okay, it's not like cooking. Like cooking, you can taste it and adjust along the way until you kind of come out with this product. Baking bread, you put everything in a bowl, you mix it all up, you got to let it rise like, I don't bake bread, but like twice. You got to go through this whole long process. Then you finally put it in the oven. If you don't get the timing right, then I think you've messed it up again. You put it in the oven, but you don't know how it tastes or if it worked until you pull it out of the oven, you let it cool for a few minutes, and you cut it and you taste it. And at that point, like, if it's good, congratulations. If you messed it up, like, you can't go back and fix it. You can, but in parenting, you can. But it is much harder down the road. So we're going to be patient with our kids. We're going to be patient with our spouse, with other moms. And that's the first step. Next, we're going to look at the next phrase. It says, help the weak. Some versions say help. Others say take care of or support the weak and the exhausted. When our kids are little or they come into a new season, they're weak. I want you to think about going to Walmart or Target or to the grocery store with your toddler, and you only have like 1 or 2 things to get, and you decide to let your toddler walk, okay? Yeah, I see the shaking heads out there. I know, this is a bad idea, but just go with me for a minute. You decide to let your toddler walk. You're kind of in a hurry. They're slower than you. You don't get on to them because they can't keep up with you. Eventually, you pick them up because they're just not capable yet of keeping up with you. They're weak. You help them. And so sometimes it's easy to think that our kids are being irresponsible or lazy when in reality, they're weak in an area and they need our help rather than our correction. So correcting your child when they actually need your help causes your child to become resentful and frustrated. So we need to begin to identify where our kids are weak and when they need our help. We're going to be talking about this more over the coming weeks. The second part of this verse, encourage the faint-hearted. We could read this as encourage or comfort or cheer up the ones who are faint-hearted or discouraged. Growing up is hard. And sometimes our kids get short-sighted too, and they just want to get it done. They just want to finish whatever they're doing, and they get frustrated, and sometimes they just need some encouragement. They're ready for us to back off of doing things for them because they're no longer weak. They just need a cheerleader. They need some encouragement. And so this is the next step as your kids are learning to do things for themselves and they're growing and maturing. It's an easy place to step in too far. It's an easy place to step back too much. Your kids won't do everything right. They will make mistakes. It's part of the learning process. But this is the level where character is forged. As our kids learn to work hard, to overcome failure, to keep trying, to persist as they learn new things. And you have the opportunity to become their biggest cheerleader. Finally, we have our last phrase, admonish the idle. Now, over the next few weeks, we're really going to dig into what does this look like practically. But what I want you to take away from this week is that there are times where we must step in and correct our kids. And this verse tells us specifically what that time is. It's when my child is idle, which can also mean lazy or unruly, irresponsible, undisciplined. And we are to admonish, which means to rebuke or to reprimand or to correct them. We don't need to fear correcting our kids. Instead, we need to know that correction puts our kids back on track. We're going to learn how to do that the right way. Correction helps us remember that we're not perfect. It reminds us of our need for God, for His wisdom for us as parents, and for His grace for all of us. Because if our kids don't learn how to accept correction, then they're never going to learn that they have a need for God, for His grace, and for His forgiveness. And so we as parents cannot neglect to admonish our kids when they're idle. So I want to just read back through this chart for you one more time. When my kid is weak, take a picture of this if you want to. When my kid's weak, I need to help them. When my kid is faint-hearted or discouraged or frustrated, I need to encourage them. And when they're idle, when they're unruly, when they're disobedient, then I need to correct them. Begin to use this. Begin to assess, where is my kid? And then that will tell you what they need. And above all, we are patient. Always. I love this approach because it helps me be others focused. It helps me see past my child's behavior to their heart. It helps me to pause for a minute rather than just reacting to a behavior that I don't like. And when we do that, when we put others ahead of ourselves and we seek to understand them and parent them, like Proverbs 22:6 says, in light of who they are, then we not only honor our kids, we're also discipling them. We're honoring the way God has made them, and we're pointing them to God instead of just correcting their behavior. Let me pray for us as we try to do that this week. God, thank you for who you are. I thank you that you are a Father, God, who helps us, who encourages us, who also admonishes and corrects us. Would you use us this week, God, to be a reflection of how you deal with us? Let us deal that same way with our kids. Would you remind us of this verse this week? when things are melting down or we're struggling with a child, would you help us to look past the circumstance and the behavior and try to identify what's going on in their heart? God, I thank you for your word. So many things, God, but I thank you that it is useful and practical to us as moms. Would you just continue to teach us that as we go through this series? We love you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.